life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Tonight, could your everyday car ride be exposing you to toxic chemicals? Then, after having their high school graduations derailed by COVID, students could be missing out on their college ceremony too. And a surprise delivery for an expectant mom and an officer on the CBS Evening News.
Jewish community, I want you to know, I see your fear, your hurt, your pain.
A judge denied Trump's lawyers' request for a mistrial. They took issue with the testimony from Daniels.
We have been very clear from here about our concerns about major operations. We have been very clear from here about protecting civilians.
Hello, everyone. I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. With just 6 months until Election Day, developments in Lower Manhattan and the Middle East could have a major impact on the presidential race here at home. In New York, adult film actor Stormy Daniels took the stand in former President Donald Trump's criminal trial. Today, the judge denied Trump's request for a mistrial based on her testimony. Daniels received $130,000 in 2016 in exchange for her silence about an alleged sexual encounter with Trump. He is accused of falsifying business records to try and cover up those payments.
This was a very big day. A very revealing day. As you see, their case is totally falling apart. They have nothing on books and records, and even something that should bear very little relationship to the case. It's just a disaster.
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Israel sent tanks into Rafah and has taken control of the Gazan side of a key border crossing to Egypt. The move comes just hours after the Israeli government rejected a ceasefire proposal backed by Hamas. Ed O'Keefe is at the White House with more on the Biden administration's opposition to that operation in Rafah. But we're going to start with Errol Barnett in Lower Manhattan and Trump's criminal trial. Errol, great to see you. What did we learn from the very anticipated testimony of Stormy Daniels today? We are going to come back to Errol in just a moment and go to Ed right now. First, at the White House, Ed, you know how technical difficulties are, so we love seeing you earlier than we thought. But talk to us about this operation in Rafah and how it is affecting some of the administration's decision-making. I mean, we have just learned that it paused at least one shipment of aid to Israel, which is unprecedented.
It is. CBS News has learned per 2 U.S. officials that there was a shipment paused in recent days. One of those officials telling CBS News it was designed to send a message to the Israeli government about the Biden administration's concern with that ongoing military operation now into Rafah, a sign, again, of how the dynamic between the United States and Israel is changing. While the president and the prime minister may spend time on the phone together, at least yesterday, which is always seen as a good sign of good communication if the two leaders are doing it, that now actual military equipment may be slowed at the least, has got to worry Israel and certainly its most ardent backers on Capitol Hill. But it's a sign, too, that the administration's trying to send signals, even if it's quietly, in that kind of a way, to Israel to say, don't do this, as we've been trying to tell you in all sorts of ways over the last several weeks. It is something that continues to occupy a lot of time here at the White House. The president himself saying very little about this publicly for fear of upsetting the ongoing talks. Today instead focused on Holocaust Remembrance Day and giving a more formal set of remarks on his concerns about anti-Semitism.
That's right. And President Biden has been pushing Israel not to invade Rafah at all. Today, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre had this to say about Israel's operation.
What I will say is the Israeli government has spoken to this, so obviously they can speak to their operations. They said it was limited. This was about making sure that designated cut of Hamas of their ability to smuggle weapons, smuggle funds, and it was a limited operation. Again, I would let them speak for themselves. And what I will say is we have been very clear from here about our concerns about a major operation.
But Ed, one thing that the administration has not been that clear on, and it's something that you actually pressed them about earlier this week, was, how they define an invasion into Rafah, because now they are really trying to make the point that, look, this is very limited in scope. It is not major, and therefore it appears that there's not going to be consequences for Israel. Is that how you're reading this too?
Yeah, they've twisted themselves up into quite the pretzel in trying to justify not only their concern, but then what it is Israel may or may not be doing. Because as we spoke with them yesterday, some kind of air operation was underway over Rafah. And then later on, we saw this apparent move into the region and then the taking of the checkpoint overnight, which you would think violates everything they've been talking about over the last several weeks. Mm-hmm. But then today and yesterday, John Kirby, the national security spokesman, sort of reiterated the idea that as long as we're not seeing massive civilian losses, this may be something they have to bear. And that is essentially where it appears to be right now, given that this taking of the crossing appeared to happen with very little resistance and certainly no real widespread harm to civilians. We'll see if that holds, depending on whatever it is Israel may decide to do in the coming days as the talks continue between Israel and Hamas.
Well, that is a really important point, Ed, because one way to get at this, to have Israel not invade Rafah in this major way, is a successful hostage deal. And we know that CIA Director Bill Burns is representing the U.S. in Cairo for the next round of negotiations. So what is the White House saying about how things are going so far?
They are encouraged that Israeli and Hamas representatives will be at these meetings. Obviously, the CIA director is involved, and then Egyptian and Qatari officials as well. But that the two warring sides are now involved and plan to be there for these talks is what gives the White House sustained hope that something may ultimately come from this. We'll have to wait and see, obviously. We've been at junctures like this in the last several months before, only to see things fall apart or get torn asunder by some military operation or some other unforeseen attack. Let's see if this holds now. But the public line from here, at least, is some sense of hope and optimism, given that everybody's back at a table, or will be soon, to discuss the particulars.
Yeah, we will all be watching very closely, Ed. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to go back to Errol Barnett, who is in Lower Manhattan. He is covering the criminal trial of Donald Trump. Errol, I'm so glad we have you now, because everyone wants to know, what did Stormy Daniels say today in court?
Hey there, Weija. Great to reconnect with you. Well, today, Stormy Daniels detailed much of what we already knew, but the difference is she's saying all of this under oath in a court of law. How she met Donald Trump, how the sexual encounter came to be, how uncomfortable she was during that episode, how she was offered by Trump to appear on The Apprentice, and how she subsequently, in the years that followed, feared for her safety. And that's how we got to that $130,000 alleged hush money payment to her for the rights of her story, so that she didn't share it around the 2016 election. But, Weija, she was, in the words of, or to use my words in describing how the judge described her, she was too verbose. She spoke too quickly and said too much. And that's why Donald Trump's defense team moved for a mistrial, because they said, look, despite the contours of what she could be asked, when prosecutors asked her a question, she gave too many details and went beyond what the question was, as it related to what Trump was wearing, as it related to Trump saying that he and his wife slept in separate bedrooms, and that's why the affair was okay. And Judge Merchant had to tell her there were a number of objections, but he had to keep intervening and saying, you're saying too much. Now, he did not allow for there to be a mistrial, but he will limit what the jury can take from her testimony, because he does find that most of it is useful, and it is quite damaging to the former president's denial. But she was a real star witness of the trial so far.
But Errol, this trial is not about their intimate moments. It's not about that sexual encounter. It is about the payment that is alleged here and the fact that, you know, the question of whether Trump knew about it. So what does the prosecution hope to get out of her testimony?
That's a fantastic point, Weija. This case hinges on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. And on Monday, the jury got to see the actual checks with Donald Trump's signature on them that were payments from him to his lawyer, Michael Cohen, for this hush money episode. What prosecutors are trying to lay out, and we've watched this happen each week, is you have almost one star witness who's notable and recognizable and close to the case, whether it was David Pecker or Stormy Daniels today. And then you have witnesses who are more technical, people like Rona Graff, who was Trump's assistant, who could confirm that she put Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal's contact information in Trump's contact list. Today, with Stormy Daniels, you had the reverse. We had someone who confirmed, or Stormy confirmed, that that she was able to put Donald Trump's contact information through Rona Graff into her phone. And so this isn't necessarily just about the hush money, it's about the narrative in general. And the jury just has to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump lied on those checks to cover up this salacious alleged affair. And so that's why you see the prosecution trying to get as close to the salacious line as possible, but Judge Juan Merchan kind of limiting them and pushing them back and saying the jury doesn't need to know all of the details as it relates to that alleged encounter.
That makes total sense, Earl. Thank you. And Donald Trump also posted today and then deleted a Truth Social post mentioning that he had just recently been told who the witness is today. How is Trump responding to the judge's threat yesterday of possible jail time for future gag order violations? Sometimes, you know, he just can't help himself.
Well, Weija, you've almost answered your question in the question, because for Donald Trump to post something to Truth Social and then delete it within 30 minutes, that's new. But it does speak to how frustrated he is, and he says as much when he enters and leaves the courtroom. In his words, this is just a conspiratorial trial from the left, when in reality, there are real charges based on evidence and documents and testimony that everything behind me is based on. And so the fact that he posted and deleted suggests that he took Judge Merchan's threat seriously on Monday, when the judge said, look, after these 10 gag order violations, the next step is to lock you up. CBS understands that they've made accommodations for that between the Secret Service court clerks and the NYPD, and Donald Trump is well aware.
Well, you're right, Errol. He is not somebody that typically resends anything. Thank you for all of your reporting.
That's right.
We have new details about a U.S. soldier being detained in Russia. Staff Sergeant Gordon Black was arrested last week in a Russian city not far from the Chinese and North Korean borders. The Pentagon says he was stationed in South Korea. The soldier's mother says Black, who is accused of stealing from a woman, was in Russia visiting his girlfriend. The U.S. has warned Americans for months not to travel to the country and had urged U.S. citizens living there to leave immediately. The White House works to broker a deal in Gaza as Israeli forces move in on Rafah. Our panel is standing by to break it all down. You're streaming America Decides.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
Just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
This appears to be a limited operation, but of course much of that depends on what comes next. They have said, I think quite clearly, it's no secret that they want to conduct a major military operation there. We have made clear that we oppose such an operation.
That was State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller this afternoon on Israel's operations in Rafah. Miller said the United States is still working to achieve an immediate ceasefire and release of hostages in Gaza. Let's bring in our reporter panel, Sabrina Siddiqui and Alexandra Ward. Sabrina is a national politics reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and Alex is a national security reporter for Politico. It's great to see you both. So, Alex, I have your latest article here, and basically you make the point that the administration has been pretty murky in terms of what they consider to be an invasion into Rafah, and also what consequences there may be if that happens. So what does their message today tell you about those two things?
Well, look, every time an administration official says they've been clear, I wince a little bit because they just clearly haven't. I mean, in one end, actually, Miller says at one point, this is actually the prelude to a major invasion. And then he was pressed on that. He goes, actually, no, it's not a prelude, or it is a prelude. He wasn't sure. John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesperson, tells reporters first that it's not they're against a major operation, and then it's, well, we're against an operation that's big or small. But then with the caveat of, well, a small operation that puts a lot of people at risk. So basically, what is it? Is it that now that the Israelis are in Rafah, is this an invasion? If it's not the invasion that they're worried about, well, then how big can it get? They just aren't as clear or as providing the kinds of parameters that they need to provide. And at this point, the Israelis have defied the United States. They've gone into Rafah, and we don't see any reprimand or any sort of push against that in the coming days.
And Sabrina, does it seem like they are creating some space for themselves to not have to change U.S. policy, even though it was just last month that they said, look, if Israel doesn't change its policies or strategies, we're going to have to. But now, despite the fact that there is an invasion, although limited in scope, according to the administration, there aren't repercussions.
I think that on the one hand, you see this delay that the administration has confirmed with respect to certain shipments, weapon shipments to Israel, but they're reiterating that there's no change in overall policy, right? They're not withholding aid or pulling support from the Israeli government and its military offensive in Gaza more broadly. And I think part of that is because the White House was sounding a very optimistic tone today about a possible ceasefire deal that would involve the release of the hostages that are currently being held by Hamas in exchange for some kind of temporary ceasefire in Gaza. And that is the administration's top priority. So, getting too aggressive in their approach with the Israeli government or being too outwardly critical is something that I think they feel would jeopardize their leverage with the Israeli government after a very tense period, right? I mean, the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, as we know, has really deteriorated in recent months. So I think a lot of it really just has to do with, on the one hand, reckoning with this, invasion, the Rafah operation underway, where there's about 1.5 million Palestinians who are sheltering, a lot of concerns about the civilian impact, even if it's limited in its scope, as what the Israelis are saying, with, of course, balancing that with their hope that maybe the Hamas and Israel are closer to a ceasefire deal than they have been in months, and just trying to get that through.
Well, of course, because if there is a ceasefire deal, the issue of Rafah sort of takes care of itself, right? Because there would be at least a temporary ceasefire. So today we heard from John Kirby, a spokesperson for the National Security Council, that things are looking pretty good. But do you have any, what does that mean at this point?
I mean, they look good in the sense that there are people talking right now in Doha, right? The CIA director, Bill Burns, is there. They're having their conversations. The confusion yesterday over what deal Hamas might have agreed to or not has somewhat resolved itself. It seems like it was changed language, but based off of the Israeli proposal. So maybe that they're closer than we initially thought. But the fact that those conversations are ongoing and they might be closer than they thought, that leads to some optimism. But it's one of those things where, no deal is done until it's done.
And the biggest sticking point really is just that, right now Hamas is essentially embracing a ceasefire deal that would be in phases, with initially more of a temporary ceasefire, but eventually, as it's phased in, require the withdrawal of essentially all Israeli troops from Gaza. So, an end to a more permanent ceasefire, whereas Israel, of course, has said, Netanyahu has categorically ruled out ending the war in its entirety, and Israel is still only open to a temporary ceasefire. So that appears to be the biggest sticking point. But of course, the stakes for Biden are extremely high in an election year, where this has just really dominated the domestic political climate here at home, where he's facing backlash over his handling of the war with key constituencies that the Democratic Party is relying on in November. And so for them, I think achieving some kind of ceasefire deal in the hopes that it would, I think, settle things in Gaza, at least for a few months, that's really, I think, high priority for this administration and would really ease some of the political fallout for them.
Yes, and the pressure on President Biden, because, I know we don't like to talk in hypotheticals, but if there is not a ceasefire deal, and if this invasion into Rafah becomes greater, and the administration does or does not respond, can you talk about the political implications of that?
Well, the polling is a little weird on this, right? Because in Michigan, where there's been a lot of attention on, how Arab Americans and Muslim Americans in that state have been feeling about the war, Biden occasionally polls like he's ahead. Most people seem to be focused on inflation, economic issues, than they are on the war, which does not take away the fact that there are massive, wide-scale campus protests, that there is immense dissatisfaction, especially from younger Democrats or progressives, with his Israel policy. But I think you've seen the president. I mean, he spoke to this when he gave the speech about the protests, right? I mean, he basically said, You're welcome to protest, have fun, you haven't changed my mind. And nothing's really going to change Biden's mind here. The only thing that changes his opinion on pretty much anything is if his inner circle revolts. And so far, there's been no defections, there's been no anger. Yes, there have been some lower level resignations from throughout the government, but no one that Biden necessarily knows or cares about. And so in that case, it seems like it's falling on deaf ears effectively.
And this is very difficult, tricky ground for the administration. And thank you both so much for sharing your reporting with us today, Alexander Ward and Sabrina Siddiqui. We're following breaking news as the Florida judge in former President Trump's classified document cases postpones the trial. We'll have team coverage next. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gailey has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars. Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am. This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former President Donald Trump's classified documents case in Florida has been postponed indefinitely. You may remember that original trial date was set for May 20th. Judge Eileen Cannon, citing significant issues around classified evidence, says that would need to be worked out before the federal criminal case goes to a jury. Our Scott McFarland and Jessica Levinson join us now. Scott, talk to us about why the judge issued this ruling today.
There was an anticipation this trial date was written in invisible ink in the first place. The prospect of a May trial seemed far-fetched because the docket is just saturated with legal challenges from the Trump team and these complex classified records issues that are unique to this case because it's about the alleged mishandling and exposure of America's classified secrets. What the judge has said here in this 5-page ruling is there are these intertwined issues involving the legal challenges and the classified records issues that it's just not tenable to have a trial in May or to set a firm trial date at all right now, which raises the prospect, if not the likelihood, this trial would happen well after the 2024 election, which means if Donald Trump were to win, this trial might not happen at all. It's the same dynamic impacting that January 6th, 2020 election conspiracy trial here in Washington. The delays raise the prospect a trial might not happen if Donald Trump wins the presidency. Not a big surprise, but a pretty definitive ruling today from Judge Eileen Cannon, who, it's worth underscoring, was appointed to the bench by Donald Trump.
And Jessica, can you explain more of that ruling, more of her reasoning about why she came to this decision?
So exactly as Scott said in his fine reporting, that she said there's just a lot of evidentiary issues to sort out. And she is pointing to the fact that we're talking about some concerns about national security. And that does raise additional questions for any judge when they're overseeing a trial like this. Having said that, I'm not aware of a situation where, or I should say it's quite uncommon, where a judge says, you know, this is just really tricky, so let's just take it off of the calendar completely. We certainly have seen delays. We've seen delays from this judge. We've seen delays from other judges. That's appropriate, and that's not unusual. But to have a judge say, this is a tough one, there's just so much to sort through, let's put it off and not set any additional deadline. That, I think, for people watching at home is interesting and rare because typically when it comes to trials, everything is keyed to that trial date. So you set the trial date, even if you know in the beginning of a case that it's aspirational, and then everything works back from that trial date. So taking it off calendar, which is really what she's done, is quite significant here.
Did she offer any explanation other than that it would be a lot of work?
Well, I think not just a lot of work, but what she's saying is that it's a lot of really tricky and complex work. And part of this is, frankly, that the former president, again, as Scott mentioned, filed lots and lots of motions. So she does have a lot to go through in this case. Now, having said that, there are cases where there is a very heavy and aggressive motion practice. And I still haven't seen a situation where the judge says the best thing to do is take it off calendar. Now, I think what would have been, frankly, in my mind, perhaps more expected and or frankly, I think appropriate would be some sort of significant delay. Because again, if you keep that trial date, at least you are keying decisions and motions to some date certain in the future, even if it has to keep getting pushed back.
And Scott, I imagine for the Trump campaign, their main line was whether this was going to happen before or after the presidential election. So is this a win for them?
Well, if their MO is to delay, which it seems to be, this is exactly what they'd be hoping for. An indefinite delay, as Jessica said, not even a new date. There's just no date any longer. All that being said, of the two special counsel prosecutions, the one in Florida over classified records and the one here in Washington over alleged election subversion, it's the latter, the election case that was built for speed. It was narrow. There are no co-defendants. There are only 4 charges. They don't even get deeply into the issues of January 6th. And they've made that case more elastic, more flexible. And that case has been stalled, too. There was not much of an aspiration from those who've been monitoring the case in Florida that it was going to go first or it was going to go early. There was this sense it was going past the election anyhow, which allows for a possible silver lining for Jack Smith. It allows him to marshal his attention and his resources towards the case here in Washington if, Ouija, the Supreme Court releases that case back to the court. You'll recall they're reviewing the issue of presidential immunity with a ruling not likely till late June. It's not clear there's enough time to have a trial before the election in Washington, but stalling the Florida case at least gives the special counsel the ability to focus his attention on Washington if that case does get the trial before November.
So, Jessica, what happens now? I mean, especially since we don't have an alternate date.
So what happens now is that the judge has indicated that she'll keep working on these issues, but let's be honest, we're not having a trial before the election. I mean, that was sure beforehand, but it is absolutely certain now. Scott mentioned the other federal case, the election interference case, and he's exactly right that we're waiting on the Supreme Court when it comes to this question of whether or not a former president enjoys some, none, or complete immunity from criminal prosecution. We're also waiting on a separate case, I would offer, from the Supreme Court about whether the obstruction statute that Jack Smith used as part of the charges in that federal election interference case, if that statute even applies to the activities of January 6th. So what happens now is that we continue to look at the New York hush money trial as, frankly, I think the only trial that's going forward before the election. And depending on what happens in the election, potentially the only trial that moves forward at all. Because for the 2 federal cases, if Trump wins the election, he can ask his attorney general to dismiss them. A judge would still have to agree. For the state case, he would make different arguments, but he would say that a state criminal trial proceeding against him as the head of the federal executive branch would create separation of powers concerns. So everything kind of slows down, frankly, at this moment while we wait for the Supreme Court and we watch the continuation of the hush money trial.
There are so many trials, there are so many developments, and we are grateful to you, Jessica Levinson and Scott MacFarlane, for making sense of them for us. Thank you.
This ancient hatred of Jews didn't begin with the Holocaust. Didn't end with the Holocaust either.
From our college campuses to communities across the country, President Biden condemns the rise of anti-Semitism as he announces new measures to protect our nation's Jewish people. You are streaming America Decides.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why? You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?
Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
What does that mean?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
President Biden forcefully condemned hateful rhetoric and violence against Jewish people today during a ceremony remembering the victims of the Holocaust.
We've seen a ferocious surge of anti-Semitism in America and around the world. Too many people denying, downplaying, rationalizing, ignoring the horrors of the Holocaust. And October 7th, including Hamas's appalling use of sexual violence to torture and terrorize Jews. It's absolutely despicable, and it must stop.
His speech comes only days after the Anti-Defamation League and Tel Aviv University published a report revealing anti-Semitism soared across the U.S. last year. It shows the number of anti-Jewish hate crimes more than doubled between 2023 and 2022. CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd joins us now. Sam, it is great to see you. I want to talk about the president's speech today because he not only denounced anti-Semitism, he talked about new measures to try to combat it. Was there anything new today that he announced?
Well, let's remember, this is the first president to ever have issued a national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. When I was at the Department of Homeland Security working to address hate-fueled violence, we initiated a series of new grant funding, information sharing, and a public website to prevent targeted violence and terrorism. Today, the president did announce a set of new steps that really build on that national strategy. For example, there is currently a law that prohibits discrimination by any federally funded program or activity on the basis of race, color, national origin, and other categories. President Biden announced today that his administration has really re-upped their information sharing with federally funded entities and programs to remind them of those commitments. On the access to resources front, President Biden announced today that the Department of Homeland Security will create a new website that will contain information about resources available to address anti-Semitism. On the partnerships front, President Biden announced today that the ambassador at the State Department who leads work to address anti-Semitism is going to convene tech platform leaders to talk about the anti-Semitism on their platform. So his announcements today build on the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism and are sorely needed.
And of course, he also talked about what we are seeing on college campuses as it relates to the protests as a result of the Israel-Hamas war. I want to take a listen to some of what he said.
There is no place on any campus in America, any place in America, for anti-Semitism or hate speech or threats of violence of any kind. Violent attacks, destroying property, is not peaceful protest. It's against the law. And we are not a lawless country.
And this is not the first time he has condemned the violence that we are seeing on college campuses, but I wonder if stakeholders feel like he is doing enough because he hasn't traveled, as an example, to any colleges to speak to students.
Well, I think nuance is important from the president's perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, and we are seeing so many different kinds of activities on college and university campuses. We have First Amendment protected activity that is critically important. We have civil unrest, which is by definition nonviolent. And we have actual criminal activity that is posing a public safety risk. The federal government's response here has been to remind college and university presidents about their obligations under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which again prohibits discrimination on the basis of national origin, race, and other matters. And I think it is very important that the Department of Education follow up on their investigations into any violations of Title VI, and that President Biden continues to reiterate the right to peaceful protest as well as the consequences for breaking the law.
And Sam, I do want to ask you a personal question because you are the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. And obviously, every year you mark this very emotional day. But how is this year different, given all that we just talked about?
Because of the explosion and normalization of anti-Semitism and hate-fueled violence in this country, this Holocaust Remembrance Day feels very different. My father, Serge, somehow survived the Holocaust as a child in France. So many members of my family were murdered by the Nazis. My father, Serge, somehow built a life defined by love, kindness, generosity, and understanding. And he spent so much time educating people in our community, not just Jews, but people in our community about the horrors of the Holocaust so that it doesn't happen again. And the normalization of hate today makes many of us take a step back and wonder if people have forgotten what happens when hate goes unchecked and what happens if people don't speak out and speak up against hate. And so for my father as a survivor, I'm horrified that he has to see what's happening in this country and just hopeful that this Remembrance Day, people are learning more about the Holocaust so we prevent it from happening again.
Sam, thank you so much for sharing that. I know so much of what we see happen in terms of hate speech stems from a lack of education and misunderstanding. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Donald Trump's classified document cases has been postponed. We'll take a closer look at the political impact of today's decision next. You're streaming America Decides.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go.
You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Welcome back to America Decides. We are following the breaking news that former President Donald Trump's classified documents case in Florida has been postponed indefinitely. David Weigel and Finn Gomez are here for analysis. David is a political reporter for Semaphore, and Finn is a CBS News political director. Okay, guys, so one trial postponed. There are plenty of others, but is this a win for President Trump that, we don't know when this is going to happen? And it was originally supposed to happen on May 20th.
Oh, it's obviously a win for him, but none of these cases have been moving votes all year. And really, since the charges were announced, the first thing they did was rally Republicans to Donald Trump, both with money and support in the primary. A lot of Republicans now say the primary was over as soon as he was indicted by Alvin Bragg. And even right now, there have been lots of cameras and lots of reporters in a courtroom in New York, and it has not broken through coverage of campus protests. It's not broken through coverage of Gaza. Democrats that I talked to, now not the only relevant party here, but Democrats who want to beat Donald Trump do not think either the indictments are hurting him very much or the charges or the delays are hurting him very much.
Could a conviction hurt him, Finn?
A conviction in the Alvin Bragg case, could it hurt him? People in his camp believe that it won't. Like, they see that. I've talked to top Democrats as well. They don't like, as David said, they don't see that there's been really an effect. We're basically even at this point, 6 months out before the election. I did talk to someone close to the Trump team just before we came on, who says this news about the docs case is welcomed and expected. And they say justice always prevails in the end. And they feel absolutely bolstered by this. And they do expect there's going to be more campaign travel, more traditional campaign travel by the former president post this hush money election interference case. But, frankly, speaking to Republicans, speaking to Democrats, there does not seem to be any sort of inclination or indicator that this will have an impact from what we're seeing right now.
And,
at this point,
even though he isn't on the campaign trail, as we've talked about a lot, he is. Can you talk about how he is using his time in court in his favor?
Well, he's giving short press conferences of a sort every single day. He's getting in the news cycle every single day. He is complaining at a lot of these events that he's not allowed because of the trial schedule to campaign around the country. Now, he wasn't traveling that much during the weekdays, even during the presidential primary, with the exception of the 1 week before the New Hampshire primary. But that is a message that his voters hear. It's a message to Republicans since they've been restacked at the RNC with his relatives and with party leaders he likes, has been raising a lot of money on. So he's been engaged in the campaign at a level that has satisfied the Republicans I talked to.
He's complained again. He's complained just today. He complained about the fact that he's not in Wisconsin. Yeah. The president is going to Wisconsin tomorrow, as we know, but he's complaining about this. But frankly, to contrast Dave's earlier point, I looked across the cable channels today, and they were wall to wall all about the Trump hush money trial. At the same time, people close to the president and his campaign say this is the split screen they want. They want the president to be speaking about issues like the big anti-Semitism address he gave today, and then you contrast that with the former president and these lurid details of a adult actress from a few years back. So look at that contrast. They want voters to look at that contrast.
And David, I want to ask you about your new article out about Trump's giant soft spot for indicted Democrats. What do you mean by that?
Well, every time really since he was president, when he pardoned Rafah Blagojevich, former governor of Illinois, Donald Trump has generally taken the stance that if a politician has been indicted, if he's gone to jail, there probably was some railroading involved. That started with being annoyed that James Comey was part of the legal team that brought down Rafah Blagojevich, that sent him to jail for 14 years. He commuted most of that sentence. That continued with the former mayor of Detroit, Kwame Kilpatrick, continued with Bob Menendez, continued in the last week with Henry Cuellar in Texas. And there are Republicans who, in a kind of a cheeky, cagey way, say that they love these indictments because they get to run against the Democrat and they want to tie the party to it. Trump breaks from that and says, no, I'm sure that he's only been indicted because the Biden Justice Department is political and it's going after his enemies. It fits right in, sinks right into what he's running on. And yeah, I think there are some ways it's hurting him with voters who are not Republicans, not but already, but it's very consistent.
Right. So it's a new installment in the ongoing book that the justice system is rigged, which we are very familiar with. So David Weigel, Finn Gomez, thank you so much for both of your reporting.
Thank you.
TikTok and its Chinese parent company, ByteDance, are suing the Biden administration over a new law that could lead to the app being banned in the U.S. Representatives for the popular video sharing app allege the measure is unconstitutional because, in part, it violates Americans' First Amendment rights. The law would effectively prohibit the use of TikTok across the U.S. if it does not divest from its owner within a year. The app has been under scrutiny by lawmakers and other officials in Washington due to the potential national security threats it poses. President Biden looks to trump his rival's 2018 promise of jobs in Wisconsin, the failed plan and what the president is promising workers in the critical battleground state next. You're streaming America Decides.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time. Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
an original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
At the CBS Evening News, we focus on solutions, finding solutions to healthcare problems, how much money we can spend on the groceries, finding solutions to help people understand what are the right choices to make for you and your family.
Welcome back to America Decides. In 2018, then President Donald Trump promised a massive Foxconn flat-screen TV factory in Wisconsin would be the 8th wonder of the world. Well, that never happened. Fast forward, and tomorrow, President Joe Biden will be in the state to highlight Microsoft's plan to expand a data center complex there. Let's bring in our Aaron Navarro, who is covering the president's campaign. Aaron, it's great to see you. So President Biden is not only going to the state where Trump touted his project, he's going to the exact same event site, which feels like a little bit of trolling. So what message do you think the president has tomorrow for voters?
Hi, Weijia. Well, this is the contrast the White House and more particularly the Biden campaign wants to make with Trump, that President Biden is actually getting some of these infrastructure jobs done while President Trump did not. And as you mentioned, they are building, expanding a data operations center for Microsoft in Racine County. This is what the president is going to be highlighting tomorrow. And parts of it will be built on parts of the land that was actually allocated and meant for the Foxconn project back in 2017. But all of this is coming as polls show that voters in these crucial battleground states believe that former President Trump, not President Biden, have a better grasp on the economy.
I'm glad you brought up recent polling, Aaron, because, you know, back in 2020, this was such a close race. And obviously, Wisconsin could make or break, one of their runs. So talk to us about what else you're seeing in these polls and what issues really matter to the voters as it stands now.
Well, let's start with the economy. In our latest CBS News Battleground poll of Wisconsin, specifically, only 33% said that they believe the economy is good, and that's among likely voters. 62% believe that the economy was better under former President Trump. Hence, you're seeing President Biden try and puncture that argument, that nostalgia that voters may feel, and as President Biden talks about jobs, infrastructure under his agenda. But Wisconsin is pivotal for President Biden. It's part of those blue wall states that Democrats, up until Trump, usually won in and helped deliver the 270 electoral votes that they need. Wisconsin's part of that blue wall, along with Michigan and Pennsylvania. And from talking to Democrats here in the state, they're expecting another close race. They said that up until November, Wisconsin is a 50-50 state, but after Election Day, it's more of a 50.3% to 49.7% state. And Democrats are hoping that they have the advantage there.
Well, Donald Trump is hoping that he can crash that blue wall, and certainly his campaign is spending a lot of time there in the surrounding states as well. So talk to us about what the Trump campaign is doing to try to win back the votes.
Yeah, in those moments where he's not in the courtroom, Trump was actually in Wisconsin, in Michigan last week, hoping to shore up some of the support that we've been seeing in some of the polls, maybe win some voters over. Even though Trump doesn't necessarily have any field offices here, as far as we know, the RNC has gotten involved in several election litigation lawsuits in Wisconsin, and the RNC is also holding their big convention this summer in Milwaukee, showing that they are looking to make a big play in the state. But so is the Biden campaign. They have more than 40 offices here in Wisconsin in conjunction with the state Democratic Party. Their headquarters for their state operations is here in Milwaukee, as well as in some rural areas. So both campaigns will be in Wisconsin and have a big Wisconsin presence in the next 6 months.
And we know you'll be there as well for us. Thank you so much, Aaron Navarro. Ron DeSantis may be starting a new beef. The governor has signed a bill that makes Florida the first in the nation state to ban the sale of lab-grown meat. The move comes even though the Food and Drug Administration declared lab-grown meat safe to eat back in 2022, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture approved its sale last year. There are similar measures underway to ban lab-grown meat in other states, including Alabama, Arizona, and Tennessee. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for May 7, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. It was a not safe for work day for jurors at work in Donald Trump's criminal trial Tuesday. Adult film actress Stormy Daniels took the stand and then took jurors on a journey to the alleged moment that she says became the thing that needed hushing up with the